To make my fairy cakes, I've put almost all of my ingredients into a bowl to start with. So in my bowl I have 125 grams of self-raising flour, 125 grams of sugar, 125 grams of margarine, which I've just cut up into chunks to make it a little bit easier to mix. I've put a teaspoon of vanilla essence in it as I'm at home and I like a little bit of vanilla, and I'm just going to add 2 eggs. So this way, nice, quick and easy. This is the all-in-one method. Everything goes into your bowl to start with, and having broken my eggs, I'm just going to go get rid of the eggshells and wash my hands. All the ingredients now are in there together, and I'm going to use my electric mixer. You can do this by hand, but I'm going to use the mixer because I didn't take the butter out of the fridge in advance and it's quite hard. So you just need to mix this. If you're using an electric mixer, just make sure slow speed to start with until you can see that everything has been mixed up and you've broken the butter. So you don't want big lumps of butter in this. I can still see some quite big lumps of butter. Once I'm certain that there are no big lumps of butter left in this, then I will turn the mixer up and mix this until it's nice and smooth and what we would call a dropping consistency. At the moment you can see that mixture looks really, really lumpy, and it's partly because the butter was so cold. So I'm just going to have to mix that until I've got a really smooth, even mixture. Okay, my mixture is done now. It's a lot smoother. If you look at that, it's an awful lot smoother than it was, and it's what we would call a dropping consistency. So if you have some on a spoon, turn your spoon and just flick it, it should drop off into the bowl. So this is ready to go into the cake cases. So normal shallow bun tray is fine for this, and you should be able to make a dozen fairy cakes from this mixture. And the easiest way to do this is to use the easiest way to get it into the cake cases is to use 2 things. So I'm going to use a teaspoon and a spatula, and you just need to put spoonfuls of the mixture into the cake case. And what you have to remember is that this mixture is going to rise. So start by just putting 1 teaspoonful into each cake case. Don't worry about filling them to the top, because as I say, the cake mixture is going to rise, but if you just put 1 spoonful in each cake case to start with, when you're done, you can then go round and add any extra mixture that you've got. But start by giving yourself 12 cakes or 12 spoonfuls of mixture in the beginning, and you can see hopefully I've got quite a bit of mixture left in that bowl. So now I'm just going to use my spatula, go round and use this mixture to top up any of the cakes that I think look a little bit small. And when you've evenly divided this, hopefully all of your cakes will be roughly the same size, but you can see there's plenty of mixture here to do a dozen good sized cakes. And while I am putting this into the cake tins, I've got my oven heating up. So I've got my oven on 180 at the moment, 180, which would be gas mark 5. So 180, gas mark 5 or 6, depending on how hot your oven is. I know the ovens at school are a little bit on the cool side, so if I was at school, I'd be tempted to put the gas oven on gas mark 6. It also makes a difference how you want to decorate these cakes. If you want them to be flat on the top, then you can cook these at 160. You want them to be really nice and flat. If you want to have a nice dome so that you can turn them possibly into butterfly cakes, then I'd have the oven a little bit hotter and I'd do it on 200. But you can see I've got 12 well-filled cake cases. They do not have to be filled to the top. You don't have to worry about smoothing them out. I'm just going to move a little bit of cake mix from that one to this one. First thing that's going to happen to these when they get into the oven is the cake is going to melt and they will smooth themselves out. So these are going into the oven for 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, my cakes have been in the oven for 15 minutes on 180 in a fan oven, and they've risen up quite a lot. These would be really good if I wanted to make butterfly cakes. They've got really good peaks on them. But the way that you tell if they're done, you should never need to stick a fork or a knife or anything else into a small cake. What you're looking for is a nice golden brown colour like we have on the edge, and if you touch them where they're palest, they should spring back. So the cake mix should actually spring back, which all of these do. Even though they are pale in colour, they are all springing back, which means that I know that they are cooked through to the middle. So these now need to cool before I can make them or decorate them. So I'm just going to leave those to one side to cool down before I make my icing, and I can decorate them. When your cakes have cooled down, you can make your icing. We're just making glace icing for this, so you just need to put your icing sugar into a bowl. I've got 100 grams of icing sugar here, and because it's glace icing, it's just made with water, and I'm just going to tip a bit of water from the kettle into another bowl so that I don't put too much water in. The thing with water icing is you need to make sure that you don't put too much water in there. So I have literally put 2 teaspoons of water in there, and I'm going to stir it up. And you can see 2 teaspoons is not going to be enough. So I'm going to put 1 more in. Don't be tempted to rush this and put loads of water in one go, because if you do, what you'll find is you end up with an incredibly runny icing that will just fall off your cake. So at the moment I'm up to 4 teaspoons, not that I'm using a proper teaspoon measure, still not going to be enough, but I'd much rather, as I say, it's a very small teaspoon this one, do it 1 teaspoon at a time and keep mixing. So it's starting to come together, and don't worry about sieving the icing sugar for this type of icing, because it really doesn't make any difference. Once it's all melted into the water, that's it. So now you can see it's starting to look a little bit more like an icing, and this is where you really can go wrong and make your icing too runny. So I've not even added a full spoonful of water this time. I've put about half a teaspoon of water in, and that's fine because I like quite a thick icing. I don't like a really thin runny icing, and all you've got to do is just keep stirring this until you can't see any more lumps in it. And the way that you can tell if it's done, if you let it fall back off your spoon, you can see it's not quite running back into itself very quickly. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water, and if you just want a tiny amount of water, the best thing to do is put your spoonful in and then tip it out, which sounds strange, I know, but that little tiny bit of water that's on the top is enough to thin that icing down again. So there we go, and that is now running into itself, a bit more easily. So to decorate, you can just put icing on the top, but as I'm at home, I've got some sprinkles, and I've put my sprinkles into a small pot. And if you're going to decorate using something like sprinkles, the ideal way to do it is to just put some icing on the top. Don't worry about spreading it right to the edge of your cake, because it will fall that way naturally. And then quickly, before the icing has got all the way to the edges of the cake, just dunk that upside down in your sprinkles, and you will have a cake covered in sprinkles. If you try and just drop the sprinkles on the top, you don't get a really good covering. So it's 1 teaspoon of icing. Just help it form a reasonable shape before it gets right to the edges of the cake. Oh, drop that one. Upside down in your sprinkles, and it takes the sprinkles almost to the edge of the cake. If you haven't got sprinkles or you're not using them, just put the icing on the top, smooth it around a bit, get it into a nice shape, and then just leave it, and it will roll down the edges of your cake on its own. If you make your icing too thin, it's just going to fall off the top. So just spoonful on the top, spread it around a bit. See if I can do this one without dropping it. Press it into the sprinkles, lift it off, and you have a cake covered in sprinkles if you've got them. You can use this icing to stick on any sort of decoration that you want, and at school you'll probably find that will give you the icing, but the decorations that you put on the top, if you want decorations on it, you will need to bring them in from home. There you go, and now I've finished. I've managed to get 11 of my cakes covered in icing. I didn't quite have enough for the 12th one, but then I did put a little bit much on some of them. So there are your fairy cakes finished.